Greetings, everyone. My name is Oskar Gonzalez, and this is my Wednesday, September 12th contribution to the lecture team of the Zeitgeist Movement. I'm here having the honors of representing the Texas chapter of the Zeitgeist Movement. Here we have many colorful characters and many projects going on. We have Peter Perez, former coordinator for the Texas chapter, now does a cultural creation webcast. You should check that out. We have the famous Zeithaus here in with Jordan Berlingeri. He also has a blog spot called diosnosis.blogspot.com. We have Tyson Eberly with Zeitgeist Live, also in Austin. We have some coordinators called Frank Flores and Oscar Gomez of I forgot what regions. And we have many projects going on. In Austin, we have the Zeitgeist Friendly Food is Free project with Jenna Jasso and Jonathan Hortzman. We have the Redesign Rebuild project with Bunny White in Austin as well. Many things happen in Austin. Myself and Jeremy Butts here in Dallas-Fort Worth area of the Zeitgeist Movement, we are working on the fireside chats where we are making a series of YouTube videos about the transition to a resource-based economy and all the concepts that you would have to deal with in doing so. So a lot of things going on here. A little background about myself. I have quite a background with science in my education. I did my undergraduate in biology and chemistry, and then I went to go get my PhD at UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas. And my fourth year into it, life happened, so I just walked away with my master's degree. But it was in molecular radiation biology department. My master's is in cancer biology and genetics, so I know a bit about cancer. My research, a big part of it was under a NASA grant where we looked at the effects of space radiation on DNA repair. At the time, NASA was really interested in what would happen to astronauts if they send them out to Mars. So my work was to simulate space radiation with the relativistic heavy ion collider out there in Brookhaven, New York, where they have a particle accelerator out there with a 2-mile long ring, and particles would be sped up and to simulate bursts of solar radiation and other stuff that comes out of supernovas. And we're really interested in finding out what happens once we leave that magnetic sphere of the Earth. We'll no longer be protected. Let's see. I spent a big part of my life in school, and I feel like I end up defending it against some people who haven't gone to school. Like I feel like people who don't go to school, like, oh, school just institutionalizes you, and I feel that instead of being institutionalized, my education in science actually freed my mind. So I think what you put into school is what you get out of it. And also being a cancer researcher, I find myself correcting a lot of people or attempting to clarify some things on Facebook quite often with erroneous posts about cancer and cancer therapies and the research industry. We have a lot of biases, and most of the time we look for evidence that supports our pre-established position, like I don't like Big Pharma, therefore Big Pharma's out to kill me, and then I look for information and we just do that. And most of the time you're right, but sometimes you're not. So I try to keep it real, I guess. Coming from the cancer research, I know I can say no, that is or that is not. That is not confirmed. So this kind of segues me into today's topic about introspection. We have a lot of biases, and why do we have these biases? We have to understand these biases. It's sort of like being a better self-aware driver. You have a car, when you're driving a car, And we have blind spots in the car. And knowing those blind spots helps us become a more informed driver. It doesn't make the blind spots go away, but you know that they're there. And that's what I wanted to do with this lecture entitled Introspection. I'm going to presume everyone here has watched the Zeitgeist movies. Do me a favor and try to remember the first time you watched the films. What was your first response? I heard some people say they got mad, others sad or overwhelmed. Personally, I remember feeling defeated after seeing Zeitgeist Part 1 and feeling really excited after seeing Addendum. So you get a variety of responses, but notice how all these responses are similar in that they're emotional responses. And there's a reason for that. We operate as if we were of two different minds. We have a left brain, we have a right brain, and they fit as a yin-yang dichotomy. We have gut and head responses, emotional and rational, feeling and reasoning. We can separate these characteristics into two parts. The first part containing the unconscious processes, feelings, intuition, and these responses work very fast. The second part we can group together can be the conscious processes, reasoning, and conclusions that can be explained, but they work at a much slower pace. And now to give you an example of both of these. If I asked you how to get to the grocery store, you can give me step-by-step instructions how to get there, because this is your head or your rational response. But if your partner asks you, why do you love me? It's harder to explain this because it's an emotional response. And as some of you have noticed, it's not the easiest thing in the world to explain your feelings or your emotions, because feeling and reasoning are two completely different processes. Our brains are the product of the environment of evolutionary adaptation. We're not the biggest animals out there, where we can use size to our advantage like elephants do. We don't have the eyesight of an owl at night, or a dog's sense of smell. We don't have teeth or roar of a lion. What we do have is our brains and our capacity to think and communicate with others. All these animals have adapted to their environment. So what kind of environment have we adapted to? Homo sapiens have been in existence for about 200,000 years. Within that time period, our species has lived mostly as hunters and gatherers. It isn't until about 8,000 years ago Homo sapiens lived in an agrarian lifestyle, meaning farming domesticated plants and animals. We've just now been scratching the surface of science and technology for the past 200 years. To help put this into perspective, if the history of our species were written proportionately in a book, 200 pages will be written on the lives of hunters and gatherers, 1 page for agrarian societies, and 1 short paragraph to sum up the world of the last 2 centuries. We are adapted to the environment of the hunters and gatherers. Think of how these two responses fit in that kind of environment. If we think we see a lion, we go with our impulses and react to the threat. We do this because we need a fast system to process this information. If we were rational-minded at all times, as in, if we were attempting to calculate the probability of a lion being present at this time of year instead of going with our gut reaction, we will be eaten. Likewise, if we were all hasty impulses and emotions, we could never develop hunting strategies or develop tools. So, in a hunter-gatherer environment, our two systems style of thinking works out very well. But as it is, we don't live in that hunter-gatherer environment anymore. So how do these two systems work out in today's environment? Which system of response has more influence, head or gut? A few decades ago, Dr. Paul Rosen did some experiments with his students. He presented edible chocolate fudge in the shape of dog feces. He explained to them that it was fudge, not feces, and asked them to eat it. Now, as you can imagine, they didn't want to. Even though their rational mind knew it was chocolate fudge, their evolutionary intuition to avoid eating poo overrides rational thought with disgust. Similar experiments were conducted by pouring soup into brand new bedpans and other similar concepts. When it comes down to it, our gut responses have more influence than our head response. This is why it's important to sleep on it before big decisions. Here's another example of how these two responses work together. Here's a word problem. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. If the bat costs $1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Now, most people's first intuition is to go with 10 cents. But if you think about it, the math doesn't quite work out. We make a quick guesstimation and run with it and don't correct it later with a head response. The correct answer would be to write down with a napkin, x plus $1 plus x equals 10 cents. 2x plus $1 equals $1.10. 2x equals 10 cents. X equals 5 cents. Unless you have a napkin ready to go, no one does this. So how do these two systems work together? We have a highly influential gut response, and we have a lazy head response. What conclusions can be drawn from all this? In the words of the author Dan Gardner, we live in the information age, but our brains are from the Stone Age. We're really responsive and strategic in the wild, but easily manipulated and lazy in the modern world. So why do we need to know how our minds operate? Self-awareness is important for critical thinking, and critical thinking is a form of self-defense. We live in a modern world with powerful social institutions that are into influencing business. And as institutions, your needs and interests are only instrumental in meeting their goals. To make things worse, these social institutions are in direct competition with other institutions with similar incentives to gain influence over our actions and beliefs. In the past 30 years, the business of influencing has become a science, people getting their PhDs in this field. Awareness is important for independent thinkers if they are to claim responsibility and ownership of their beliefs and values. In the 1970s, a huge paper came out by Tversky and Kahneman entitled Judgment Under Uncertainty, Heuristics and Biases. They won a Nobel Prize in economics for this, even though they were psychologists, which is really revealing. There are many interesting points in this paper, but the one idea I want to point out for this lecture is the affect heuristic, which is a technical term for emotional rule of thumb. You should check it out, affect heuristic, Heuristic. It's really interesting. And the idea here is that language is very powerful because emotion precedes thought and is very subtle. Take, for example, a study that gauged responses from two groups tasting the exact same meat. One group was provided a sample of ground beef and was told that it was 75% lean, and it was asked to grade it. Another group was provided the exact same meat, but this time it was told that it was 25% fat. Even though the math percentage is the exact same thing, the 75% lean received a higher grade. Another study was done with finding out how much people are willing to pay for airplane life insurance against death caused by terrorism versus all causes of death. Even though all causes of death includes death by terrorism, people are willing to pay more for the terrorism insurance. So we see examples of this emotionally charged language everywhere. Like take, for example, Happy Meal. It's just a happy meal. It's just terrible. I can't stand it. I don't like my children eating McDonald's, but every now and then I give in. But the conditions of going to McDonald's and they want a Happy Meal because of the stupid toy, they have to call it a sad meal. There's no way around it. That's the only way. That's the only compromise I'm willing to do. They have to call it a sad meal to counteract the affect heuristic they're going to ingrain in themselves by calling it a Happy Meal. Also, you have the logo for Walmart. They have this new like sunshine burst or something, and it's white, and it just looks clean just by reading it. I feel like I've taken a shower. Walmart, save money, live better. If I think about that rationally, save money, live better, yeah, I won't go to Walmart. But emotionally, my gut response, my emotional response to this is like, and I don't like it. Here in Texas, we have a radio station called 94.9 KLTY, and it says their logo is safe for the whole family. And it always shows a family of four, all Caucasian, wearing white T-shirts of purity, holding hands. And it's like safe for the whole family. What does that mean? It enrages me. So, also you can see this affect heuristic whenever you read the 9/11 Commission report. It's just a big propaganda piece. Like it says in chapter 1 or 2, It says like at 8:15 a.m. the 4 terrorists boarded the plane and from Boston and went towards New York, and it said 4 terrorists. It didn't say the 4 suspects boarded the plane. It didn't say the 4 hijackers boarded the plane. It said 4 terrorists. So they can emotionally charge that word whenever you start downloading, I don't know, music, and then you can be labeled as a terrorist. So that's all it is. It's exploiting the affect heuristic, taking advantage of our gut response, our second system 2 response to these things. Another example is I have this clip for Betham's world famous corn and bunion plaster cures when all other remedies fail. Some kind of like feet therapy for whatever corn you have on your feet. And the advertising is just all words. And compared to today's advertising, you see these drug companies making commercials with happy, healthy people, and no one's sick, and it just makes you feel good, even though they're burning right through that list of dangerous side effects. And they're just like causes nausea, vomiting, anorexia, suicide, and diarrhea. I don't know. And it's just the whole time is showing you happy, smiley people because they know through science that the happy smiles is going to last longer in your mind than the horrible side effects they're required to tell you by law. Of course, if you're going to abuse the affect heuristic of our gut response, nothing quite sells like fear. I barely have to go into this one. Everyone knows about the fear angle people use to promote sales or some agenda. I'll just leave it there. But what I do want to talk about is risk perception. I have an ad here in front of me from Infowars.com that says in big bold letters, "Vaccines kill," with a skull and cross syringes. Of course, vaccines kill, absolutely. But how often? 1 out of how many people? How does that compare to other things such as peanut allergies, or car crashes, or heart disease? This kind of information helps me gauge rational fear with risk perception. Without risk perception, we can have a very skewed view of reality. We have a bias towards novelty stories. No one cares about dog bites man stories. So what? Who cares? But man bites dog. That's something new and we're interested in. If you viewed a list of 50 words in blue font and just one of those words were in red font, that'll be the one word you'd remember. So if we constantly read or watch stories about man bites dog, and that's all that makes it on the news, we'll develop a very skewed perception of man and dog relationships. What we need to understand about all the stories in regard to corrupt business, criminals, police violence that we expose ourselves to on YouTube or Facebook, though they happen, it doesn't necessarily happen all the time. There are a whole lot of more boring nothingness happening out there in the world that doesn't get broadcast, and we need to understand that ratio. Another pitfall to consider along with our susceptibility to the affect heuristic is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a tendency for people to prefer information that confirms their preconceptions or hypotheses, independently of whether they're true or not. So a study was done to illustrate this confirmation bias by interviewing a group of people and finding out their positions on capital punishment, whether supporters or opponents of it. And after they were interviewed and their responses recorded, they were handed a piece of paper that was well written and perfectly balanced, both for and against capital punishment. And after reading the paper, all the people were interviewed again to see if their positions changed, and they were even stronger with their original positions. Whether they were supporting it, they supported it even more, and they had more information to support their bias, and people who were against it were even stronger against it. And no one, they just threw out the information that didn't help their cause, even though it was purposely balanced. They took out of it what they wanted to. So this is a really important thing to consider on this day and age, that we're no longer in the hunter-gatherer society. We're in this modern age we have access to Google. And in Google, you can type in any position that you have on, let's say, vaccinations or fluoride or what have you, or space aliens were involved in 9/11. I don't know. I'm pretty sure you could find that kind of support in this information age. You're bound to find somebody on the internet who supports your view, and that's not the way we do things in science. In science, we take a disconfirmation approach. We try to prove ourselves wrong, and that way we protect ourselves from confirmation biases. Another bias we need to be careful with is called group polarization, and this is really important as a movement for the Zeitgeist Movement to be careful of. Group polarization is the tendency for people to make decisions that are more extreme when they're in a group, as opposed to making a decision made alone or independently. People get together and they get more radical, and they're like, yeah, and they get all pumped up, which is a good thing, I think, like to say in our Z days. But if you consider quotes from other kind of groups, like I'm recharging my batteries, this is a quote that was pulled from a Bible camp, or we're celebrating our numbers, and this is like a quote pulled from a Ku Klux Klan convention. So everybody, they go in there as an individual, they just become more and more immersed into the group philosophy instead of individual. And that could be a good thing, that could be a bad thing, but you have to be aware that as individuals we can be rational, but as a group sometimes the group can be irrational. I really like the quote from George Carlin where it says, be careful of people in groups. He's like, he likes people individually, but he can't stand groups of people. And I think this is something he might be talking about. We need to be careful with. Now, I talked a lot about affect heuristic and pitfalls from our gut response or system one or our feeling, but I hadn't really talked about pitfalls of our rational thinking, and that's susceptible to biases in itself. And one of those concepts is called cognitive dissonance, and it's a state of tension that occurs whenever a person holds two cognitions, like they're in contrast with each other, like I'm a rational being that looks after my health, and I also smoke cigarettes, but I smoke anyway because, you know, I can't quit too many habits at once or whatever. You just come up with an excuse to justify your actions. And to whenever you hold these two ideas that are in conflict with each other, like I shouldn't smoke and I like to smoke, we come up with self-justification to solve this cognitive dissonance. So it becomes this self-justification machine where we rationalize our contradictions until everything makes sense again. And we'll use anything in our mind to help us achieve that, using confirmation biases, looking for information to support a cause, or memory bias. We just remember what we want to remember if something's bothering us. Step-by-step justification can take us anywhere. You can get anybody to do just about anything as long as you do it one step at a time. And it's really easy to do that if you do it with self-justification and resolving cognitive dissonance. So that's a pitfall to remember for the system 2 head response. So the idea here we really want to keep in mind is maintaining the balance between this head and gut response. So we have susceptibility for both of these, but we really want to keep a balance. We don't want to be too extremes like the Tin Man and the Scarecrow. One thing we do here in the Zeitgeist Movement is we align ourselves with nature. And a reoccurring theme in nature is maintaining balance and equilibrium. Whenever there's an action, there's an opposing and opposite reaction. So whenever groups sort of, or societies kind of push to one end where you have all science people, you get a fanatical response of fundamentalism with religion. Or if you have a bunch of fast food, you're going to have an uprising of the slow movement. Or you have a bunch of cutthroat capitalism, you're going to have a response like the Occupy. So keep the balance on everything. Don't go all rational. Don't go all gut. With introspection, it helps us look at ourselves and why we do what we do, and it helps us understand ourselves. And with introspection, it helps us become more empathetic when dealing with others, because you can recognize certain behaviors you see in them. You see a little bit of yourself in them, and you know how to communicate to overcome these sort of obstacles that on your own will help you with your communication with others and helping them understand in a way, because you understand what they're going through and what their mind processes are. It helps reduce dismissive attitudes like, they're an idiot. It's like, well, no, actually, there's some psychology behind that. They have a lot of psychological baggage, and you have to help them overcome that. It helps us with empathy. So we really need to change ourselves before we change others. This is an example of that, becoming the change yourself, because if you change yourself, you understand all the processes involved with change and what to be prepared for when trying to help others make that change. Okay, that concludes a lecture of introspection. I have a lot of references here. A lot of this is based on the book The Science of Fear by Daniel Gardner. A whole lot of it to do with it. It was a really good book. He talks about more about risk perception than I did on this one, but I really liked the whole psychology, and he helped my research make it a lot easier. Another book I based this on, maybe like a third of it, was Mistakes Were Made But Not By Me, Why We Justify Foolish Beliefs, Bad Decisions, and Hurtful Acts by Chavars and Aronson. Also, I used some information about our evolution from Pandora's Seed by Spencer Wells, really good. Got a whole bunch of good nuggets of information from some podcasts called The Psych Files by Michael Britt, another podcast, Philosophy Bites by David Edmondson and Nigel Warburton, and another podcast called The Critical Thinker by Kevin Delaplante.